Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So this is going to be talking about the Israel-Hamas war, Al-Shifa Hospital, and the Rwanda policy, both of which have been mentioned on the Pursuit of Truth throughout this year. Lots of Sky News clips. And the reason I think I collate these, because I was trying to think, why am I still doing this? But I think it's because sometimes on these kind of truth YouTube videos, podcasts, whatever you want to call it, people will come up with their assertions and their, bias or whatever, their arguments. But without the context or the evidence, as it were, and this is why I'm collating these, I guess, is because these are the evidence of my proof of the failure of the system that everyone is holding on to, and everyone says is the only way we could all live, this way of money, this way of control, this way of division of land and division of humanity, this system that we live in, our day-to-day existence. And these are proofs that it doesn't work, and also proofs that, war is not the answer, as the last podcast was. And I guess that quote, man's inhumanity to man, that and also the messiness of these situations where we put people, because we believe in democracy, voting people in, and we believe in this, that this is a great thing. Whereas at the end of the day, what it is that these suited people have been given control to decide everything for us all in our names. And a lot of, I'm sure, I don't want to be like them and say, well, this is what the people want, but I'm sure, let's speak about myself, because that's the only thing we can all ever do. We can only ever speak for ourselves, because we can't detail everyone else's views, because there's 7 billion of us. And who has the audacity to say that this is what all of us believe? Well, politicians do, and statisticians and journalists. But let me not do that. My own personal view is a lot of what I see the system, the government, the world doing is not in my name. Like they keep talking about with the Rwanda thing, stop the boats, that the British people want this. No, I don't think they do. There may be those Daily Mail readers, those people who are xenophobic or racist in nature, or don't like to help out fellow human beings, mainly because of the system, because they've been brought up in this little circle of land and saying this is yours and you must protect this. And when they see, their claimant is that when they see other people get jobs that they can't get, oh my goodness, but wait a minute, what are these? This is other human beings just like you. They're human beings, you're human beings, we're all human beings. We all found ourselves upon this place. We had no right to chop it up and say this is yours and you have to have a piece of paper to get here and there or whatever, because who can say they own the earth or any part of it? That's just what man has told itself, so that it can legitimise this terrible scheme that we all live in. So, yeah, I'm sure there are lots of people, but I don't think the majority of people are very happy with this outsourcing, this obfuscation of duty. Britain was my understanding historically, very involved in the asylum idea, that. And this is where I think it has a problem, is that if you come to a country and you seek asylum, whether it's legitimate or not, you're using those words. I think it actually goes back to Christianity, no? Because people used to seek asylum in churches, didn't they? But they seek asylum. You say those words in that piece of, wherever you've decided you want to seek it, which is your choice, my understanding under the law. If that's then here, and you say those words, then that, to me, means that country that's decided that it wants to be part of that treaty, be part of that honourable system of asylum in the system that we live in. In my view, we're all human beings and we shouldn't need any of this. And everywhere should be exactly the same, and every country should have every infrastructure that every other country has, and every country shouldn't need money and all these things. But in the system that we live in, getting back to that, they then seek that asylum. It's up to that country then to deliver it, and to judge it, and to give it or not. Not for you to then outsource it like a business, to somewhere else. It doesn't matter whether that country's safe or not, in my eyes. That's immaterial. The fact is that you're then asking that person, you're moving that person from one place to another, and that person is not going to say, I want asylum in, in this case, Rwanda. If they don't say those words, they're not seeking asylum there. They sought asylum when they got to the shores of Britain and they said those words. That's where I think the moral issue is in the system. In my view, this shouldn't be necessary, because we have all the energy and all the resources to make every country as good as the country that we all live in, to make them all equal and to make all of us equal, and stop wasting our time on all these unnecessary things that we do with the resources that we found ourselves upon, like tagging it and saying this is yours, this is mine, and we're going to do all this, and manufacture things just to sell them and waste all our time and energy, rather than actually advancing humanity and living together in our one existence, coexisting as fellow human beings and brothers and sisters. So yeah, that's my view on that. So anyway, we're going to start with the Al-Shifa. We still haven't heard from that British Palestinian doctor. I don't know when they're ever going to get to him again, because he was telling the story for the last few weeks on this. We're coming into the 6th week now, if we're not already in it. And this is a document from the, I'm not alleging to any side. I'm a human being. Israel, Palestine, Hamas, whatever, they're all human beings. Yes, they all have their different views, and obviously Hamas is considered a terrorist organisation, and the massacre they did on October 7th, which I've mentioned many times, is a massacre and it's bad and it's wrong, it's evil, and it's a war crime, and the kidnapping of people is a war crime. Using hospitals and other institutions is a war crime. Bombing indiscriminately innocent people, women and children, is a war crime. Lots of these. You can put tags on people and say this, that and the other, and there'll be people with confirmation bias and people with allegiances with certain religions and certain peoples and etc. who will only see one way and then the other. But at the end of the day, all I can see is human beings on all sides, even the West, capitulating and sort of helping with military, making weapons in the first place and selling them to countries, both sides, so that they can have these porn wars, as it were, as in like chess proxy wars, and then also, saying, oh no, have international law, but let's argue over the word pauses and ceasefire, and let's, not vote for these things, and get rid of people in our political parties because they don't follow our favour. This country seems to be becoming more like these authoritarian countries like Russia and China we always moan about, and we seem to be becoming more and more like that. Anyway, let's start with this one.
Israel's military has insisted no fighting has taken place within Gaza's largest hospital. The IDF announced it was carrying out a precise and targeted, in its words, operation at the Al-Shifa facility, where it claims to have found Hamas weapons and terror infrastructure. The US officials say they have evidence the militant group is using the hospital for command and control, which both Hamas and hospital officials deny. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says it's lost touch with health personnel at Al-Shifa and is extremely worried about the safety of staff and patients. Our International Affairs editor Dominic Waghorn has this report.
Under cover of darkness, filmed from above, Israeli armour and troops on the move towards Gaza's largest hospital. Al-Shifa medical complex has been encircled by Israeli forces for days. Now they were moving in. In the footage that Israelis are sharing, troops are delivering medical aid to the hospital, boxes of baby food and incubators. But away from here, the troops were coming to search the hospital, according to Israelis, hunting down their enemy. 4 Hamas fighters were killed on the way in, say Israelis. Weapons and Hamas infrastructure found inside the hospital. Palestinians claim there was fighting inside Al-Shifa and there were attacks before. This, they say, was the damage. And they've shared footage of babies having to be moved, apparently because of lack of fuel to power their incubators. Al-Shifa has become a symbol of Palestinian resilience. Thousands have sought sanctuary there from Israel's massive bombardment, outside and inside in wards. Staff have been working under extraordinary pressure there, and now appear to be coping with an operation inside their hospital. Israel's already attacked another hospital further north. They claim to have found evidence of Hamas activity at Rantisi Hospital, weapons caches and tunnels.
I want to show you a room where we found all the gear, the operational gear of Hamas. Hamas is using hospitals, like we showed the evidence in Shifa Hospital. In other hospitals, we are now seeing it in live in Rantisi Hospital.
Hamas denies using either hospital. It says US President Joe Biden gave the go-ahead for the Al-Shifa raid after his spokesman said this last night.
I can confirm for you that we have information that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad use some hospitals in the Gaza Strip, including Al-Shifa, and tunnels underneath them to conceal and to support their military operations and to hold hostages.
Gaza's hospitals have all suffered. Last month, many died in a blast at the Al-Ali hospital. The IDF says this raid is within a specified area of the sprawling complex at Al-Shifa. It's called on all Hamas members within the hospital to immediately surrender. Endangering medical facilities violates the rules of armed conflict unless they're being used for military reasons. Israelis will need to show that was the case in Al-Shifa. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
Dominic Waghorn reporting there on the latest from the hospital. Well, this is Sky News Today coming up.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's another bit. I hope I've still got it somewhere. It might be this next bit when they talk to an analyst of Sky News, and he talks about the Al-Shifa hospital. Some tunnels, or maybe the initial tunnels, were actually. Might be this bit. Were actually made by Israel when they ran the hospital, which I didn't know that all of this historical thing. But the question that's never asked, when the analyst says about it was Israel that started these tunnels, what was the reason for them to build these tunnels in the first place? Under a hospital. I don't know, maybe there's a genuine reason for it. But anyway, yeah. I think it's this bit.
The military has entered Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, in it's calling a targeted and precise operation. Hamas claims they don't have a presence inside, but an Israeli senior defense official says they have concrete evidence the facility is being used as a terror HQ. Well, our military analyst, Michael Clark, is here to tell us more. What is the latest on the ground? I know it's difficult to get the information out, but what do we know?
Yeah, the Israeli military, they've committed 3 divisions to this area of North Gaza, which is about 50,000 troops. They could have committed more, but you know, in general, they get in each other's way in a small space, so it's better to do it this way. And they've closed in on the Al-Shifa hospital, both from north and south. They surrounded it with tanks, and then some commando units, as it were, stormed into the hospital. Seems to have gone to the top of the building and are working their way down. There's no reports that I've seen that there was any shooting inside the hospital. I think the hospital staff were completely passive, and the Israeli individuals, the personnel from the Israeli Defense Forces, simply went through the building and checked it out. Now that they've checked out the building, they'll now get down to what they really want to do, which is to get underneath the building and have a look at the bunkers and tunnels which are under there. We all know there are bunkers and tunnels because the Israelis built some of them when they were in control of the Al-Shifa hospital before 2005. So they're certainly there. They don't know how much they may have been extended, and they're now going to start to get down into those tunnels and bunkers and clear them, see what's there.
How impossible is it for the Israelis to try and mitigate harm to civilians in this operation?
Well, they can do a certain amount, and that's what they have been doing. We've seen footage of Israeli soldiers bringing in sort of a certain amount of stuff, and they're thinking about these incubators and getting some power generators working again. But all of this is hand-to-mouth stuff. I mean, the Israeli army have been really poor at this. They've had weeks to think about it, and because the government in Tel Aviv has been completely confused about what this operation is really trying to achieve, they've given the military no explicit instructions. And the military themselves, they have civil affairs officers with each unit, but their job usually is to sort of take a list of complaints and just talk to locals. What they needed to do, and what some of us have been waiting to see for a couple of weeks now, are the creation of big humanitarian civilian units, or units that could offer humanitarian aid to the civilian population. As the soldiers moved in, the humanitarian operation should have moved in right behind them. And they've had a long time to think about what were they going to do when they actually got hold of the Al-Shifa hospital. And here they are, local commanders doing the best they can, bringing bits and pieces in as and when they think it can make some difference. I mean, this is pretty poor planning on the part of the IDF and particularly the Israeli government.
Thank you very much. Really interesting to hear your analysis on the operation that we're seeing there in that hospital. Michael Clark there.
Yeah, and here's the next one. This is to do with the Rwanda. It's the interesting thing here, I thought, was when this is the Supreme Court, the highest in the land, as they often like to say, ruling on the appeal of the Rwandan asylum project, whatever you want to call it. What was interesting is he details the UN, who says, talks about that it's not fit for purpose, basically, and the fact that the government seemed to have known all this when they decided to outsource their asylum program to Rwanda. It just makes you wonder, like, when they know all these things and they still do it, and they must know all the treaties and stuff, but it's just wasted a lot of money and a lot of time hoping that, well, they could just blag it through, I guess. But the interesting thing that does come up is the UN has sort of said, they've used this UN evidence that the UN seemed to have given to the Supreme Court, and that's the basis of thinking that this country isn't fit for purpose because of reformer, i.e. sending back to the country of origin could happen due to poor decisions. And the issue is then that other MPs later, you'll hear, mention that the UN actually do use Rwanda for their asylum program. So, well, that doesn't seem to make sense. Like a bit Orwellian, and as I often keep saying nowadays, doublethink of having two conflicting views at the same time. How can the UN be using it and also criticising the UK for using it? So that's really weird. But that just goes to show the bureaucracy of the world that we live in. That those people in charge of us, those suited people, those leaders, are not really doing what's best for humanity and for us, are they? Because, well, anyway, in my view, this system is the problem, isn't it? We've got a problem. People coming from one country to another because of war, because of the terrible situations they find there. Well, let's get to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that we decided to divide up land and govern bits of it in different parts of humans, and then created this problem against each other, which has developed over years, these hatreds that each country has for different countries. But the main thing is putting everything down to money and saying that we want to keep this country poor and this country rich because we want to use that country and we want to be higher than that country and all that kind of stuff that's going on by proxy. Whereas we could just decide that, well, a minute, we all know we have the energy, we have the resources, we have the ideas. Let's make every place a brilliant place, and then why? Well, there wouldn't be any need for asylum. I know that seems very rose-tinted, and that's a big journey to go down. But that's the better journey to be thinking about. Why is no one thinking about that? All these great leaders, these great thinking people. Because the system that we have is rubbish. But it's just as feasible as having a better one, because it's not impossible to have. It's just about, the same as the way that we all, we're born and we all decide that we all have to work and we all just get on with it because that's what we're told. Well, we could be told whatever we're told. As babies, everyone's fresh. So it's not like it's impossible. It's no more impossible than the shit decision system that we found ourselves in.
Sent to Rwanda will be at real risk of ill treatment as a consequence of refoulement. If there are no such grounds, the policy is lawful. If there are such grounds, the policy is unlawful. It is argued on behalf of the Home Secretary that there are no substantial grounds for believing that asylum seekers who are sent to Rwanda will be at risk of refoulement. A memorandum of understanding has been entered into between the UK and Rwandan governments, which includes an undertaking that asylum seekers will not be subject to refoulement. Although the Memorandum of Understanding is not legally binding and cannot be relied on by asylum seekers, the Home Secretary says that Rwanda can be relied on to comply with it. There are financial incentives for Rwanda to comply with the memorandum, and it establishes arrangements for monitoring Rwanda's compliance. As against that, UNHCR, the United Nations Refugee Agency, has produced evidence of a number of deficiencies in the Rwandan asylum system. The relevance of that evidence is that if claims are not dealt with properly, then genuine claims are liable to be wrongly refused. And when claims are refused, Rwanda is entitled, under the memorandum, to expel the claimants to any country where they have a right to reside. The only country where most people have a right to reside is their country of origin. So if Rwanda does not have an adequate system for processing asylum claims, genuine refugees may be returned to their countries of origin. In other words, they may be subject to refoulement. In addition, UNHCR has produced evidence of a substantial number of cases of refoulement of asylum seekers by the Rwandan authorities, including during the period since a Memorandum of Understanding with the UK was concluded. It has also produced evidence of Rwanda's failure to comply with a similar agreement which it entered into with Israel. When this case came before the Divisional Court, it failed to give proper consideration to UNHCR's evidence. That was a mistake. UNHCR has unrivaled practical experience of the working of the asylum system in Rwanda through long years of involvement there, and its evidence requires careful consideration. So the Court of Appeal was right to overturn the High Court's decision and to consider the evidence again for itself. It concluded by a majority that asylum seekers who are sent to Rwanda are at real risk of refoulement, and that the policy is therefore unlawful. The question for this court is whether they were entitled to reach that conclusion on the evidence. The Court of Appeal based their conclusion on the following evidence. First, Rwanda has a poor human rights record. In recent times, British police have had to warn Rwandan nationals living in the UK of credible plans by the Rwandan government to kill them. In 2021, the UK government criticised the Rwandan government for extrajudicial killings, deaths in custody, enforced disappearances, and torture. There are also concerns about media and political freedom in Rwanda. Since Rwanda has ratified many international human rights conventions, this evidence raises questions as to its compliance with its international obligations. It's also relevant to the question whether the Rwandan courts can be expected to act independently of the Rwandan government when deciding appeals against the Rwandan government's decisions on asylum claims. Secondly, UNHCR's evidence is that there are systemic defects in Rwanda's procedures and institutions for processing asylum claims. To mention only some of the points raised, they include, first, concerns about the asylum process itself, such as the lack of legal representation, the risk that judges and lawyers will not act independently of the government in politically sensitive cases, and the fact that the right of appeal to the High Court, which has existed in theory since 2018, has never, in fact, been exercised. Secondly, Rwanda's 100% rate of rejection of asylum claims from countries in known conflict zones from which asylum seekers removed from the UK may well come, such as Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan, although the UK authorities often find that such claims are well-founded. Thirdly, Rwanda's practice of refoulement, of which UNHCR gave over 100 examples, which continued during the period after the UK's agreement with Rwanda was concluded. And fourthly, the Rwandan government's apparent misunderstanding of its obligations under the Refugee Convention. The third matter raised is, in UNHCR's evidence, is Rwanda's failure to fulfill undertakings which it gave to the government of Israel under an agreement for the removal of asylum seekers from Israel to Rwanda, which operated between 2013 and 2018. In terms of the agreement, asylum seekers sent from Israel to Rwanda were to be allowed to claim asylum there, and there was an explicit undertaking by Rwanda to comply with the principle of non-refoulement. The agreement was therefore similar in those respects to Rwanda's agreement with the UK. Despite the terms of the agreement, asylum seekers who were sent to Rwanda by the Israeli government were routinely moved clandestinely to a neighbouring country from which they were liable to be refoulement. That evidence is not contradicted, and it raises a serious question as to whether the undertakings given by Rwanda under its agreement with the UK government can be relied on. As I've explained, the legal test which has to be applied in this case is whether there are substantial grounds for believing that asylum seekers sent to Rwanda would be at real risk of refoulement. In the light of the evidence which I have summarised, the Court of Appeal concluded that there were such grounds. We are unanimously of the view that they were entitled to reach that conclusion. Indeed, having been taken through the evidence ourselves, we agree with their conclusion. We accept the Home Secretary's submission that the Rwandan government entered into the agreement in good faith, and that the capacity of the Rwandan system to produce accurate and fair decisions can and will be built up. Nevertheless, asking ourselves whether there were substantial grounds for believing that a real risk of refoulement existed at the relevant time, we have concluded that there were. The changes needed to eliminate the risk of refoulement may be delivered in the future, but they have not been shown to be in place now. The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed. There is also a cross-appeal on behalf of one of the asylum claimants who argues that...
So it goes on. So there you go. But what interests me is that he detailed so much of the information, you know, what the UN and they must have known all these things, and you know, Israel using the same and all that kind of stuff, and yet they still thought, oh yeah, this would be a great idea, let's do this, because all they cared about is actually moving one set of people from one place to another, so it's not their problem. It reminds me of the Douglas Adams, what was it, somebody else's problem phenomena. Real human beings who just want to live a better life. Well, let's give every human being a better life. Get rid of the system, get rid of money, get rid of deciding, you know, power and control, and that this person has power over this bit of land. Let's all share it as human beings and our one existence. Here's a bit more when they discuss it.
Deportation policy was unlawful. And here with Beth Rigby, our political editor, and Annette Elder, a legal expert on immigration policy from the Law Society. Beth, let's get right to the crux of this. A unanimous decision to rule the Rwanda deportation policy as unlawful.
A unanimous decision, a huge blow to the Prime Minister. This policy, this visual symbolism of him tackling the small boats, the plan was to be able to put failed asylum seekers on planes to Rwanda. The visual antidote, if you like, to those images of people coming across to the southern coast on boats. It has been ruled unlawful. It's a big blow to the government. It will increase the anger from the backbenchers led by Suella Braverman that the government is failing on the immigration policy. And now the Prime Minister will have to think, what does he do next? Does he try and find other countries to try to return people to? Does he try and put something through the House of Commons? But this is a massive blow for the government today. This is a pivotal policy, the linchpin of his migration plan, and it has failed in the courts after 18 months have been announced. Still no planes going to Rwanda.
No planes, hundreds of millions of pounds already spent. Annette, as I mentioned, from the Law Society, an expert on immigration policy, we were waiting for this decision. We didn't know if it would be a split decision, if there would be lots of caveats attached to it. Your reaction to a unanimous upholding of the Court of Appeal's ruling that this policy is unlawful?
I mean, the fact that it's unanimous, is a very strong endorsement of the Court of Appeal decision. And it's a really strong endorsement of all the people who have spoke out since the plan was first announced in April 22, that this was, unsafe, unjust, not lawful. Of course, it's not the end of it. The government, as Beth have said, they're not going to let this go. There'll be other things that they will think about. It will add momentum behind calls for, rethinking our relationship with the European Court. So before we get to what comes next, and I'll come to Beth for that, just remind our viewers why they've reached this unanimous decision. It all comes down to the ECHR and whether refugees once arriving in Rwanda would have been safe or not. Just explain that a little bit more. I mean, very broadly, the arguments before the Court of Appeal related to the legal test around whether it was unsafe in Article 3 ECHR terms to relocate people to Rwanda. Also, the general evidence related, mainly from UNHCR, relating to the processes in Rwanda, access to lawyers, asylum interview procedures, their appellate process, whether they could protect people from ending up being returned to their country of origin and the risk of persecution. There were some subsidiary arguments around EU retained law, but the crux of it really is whether people could be safely returned to Rwanda. And a unanimous Supreme Court decision very much endorses that, all the thousands of pages of evidence that showed it wasn't safe, that Rwanda is not, their procedures are not robust enough to make these determinations, that there was merit in those arguments. So
Lord Reid did say towards the end there are changes to the policy that might make it possible to be enacted, but they haven't been presented yet. Maybe we'll come back to that in a moment with Annette. But Beth, there are lots of options now for the government. There's the nuclear options on the table, like trying to leave the ECHR, or there's a more nuanced one. But what's your assessment as to what's likely? What might placate the right of the party?
There are other options, but let's just pause on this. The Prime Minister stood on a stage at the beginning of January this year. He told the British public, I will stop the boats. Everyone said that is a really hard thing to deliver because there's no silver bullet. There's so much complexity around trying to stop migration in other countries where people are trying to come. Do you need a returns deal with the European Union? Well, you're not going to get one of those because you've left the European Union. How do you deal with the border on France? It's not an easy resolution. It is not easy at all. So it's already a really difficult policy. He then hung the whole thing around deportations to Rwanda. There was a moot point about whether or not the policy would be effective anyway. I mean, the permanent secretary at the Home Office back in November last year, I think, said there's some questions about whether or not this policy is effective, but the symbolism of it, because the Prime...
See, this is the problem. As both of them have said, lots of people said this wouldn't work. Lots of people said this, because of this, that and the other issues, and they've come across those issues now in this report. If they'd listened to those people, then they could have saved themselves a whole lot of money and time. But it's often the way. These leaders do not listen to other people when they tell them that there's something wrong with your plan. Why is that?
Government's plan, and just that unanimous judgment we mentioned, the 5-0 judgment by the justices
the Supreme
upholding
Court for its
the
careful
Court's appeal decision that the government's policy is unlawful.
This judgment and this victory for our brave clients who stood up to what is an unlawful and inhumane policy. Today, it's not just a victory for them, but it's a victory for the rule of law. It's a reminder that no one is above the law, and it's timely that governments are told that they have to stay within the boundaries of the law. We can hope now that our clients and many others can dream of a safer and better future. Thank you.
And it's funny, he's talking about the rule of law, and so this is why I was talking about authoritarian governments becoming more like that, is because what is Rishi Sunak's plan? His plan is, well, okay, the Supreme Court has said it's unlawful Rwanda. What we're going to do is we're going to get a treaty, fix some of those problems, vote it in court and say that Rwanda is a safe country. We're going to do that, the MPs, and then no one can say anything about it. So they're going to force it through. And you want to then say that you believe in democracy and law when they've told you can't do it and it's wrong and it's not lawful, and yet this is how you're going to bypass it. This is so Orwellian, isn't it? This is a Big Brother kind of stunt. I think this is a speech here.
Today, the Supreme Court has judged that the Rwanda policy requires a set of changes in order to be lawful. I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. The rule of law is fundamental to our democracy. We have prepared for all outcomes of this case. And so we have been working on a new international treaty with Rwanda. This will provide a guarantee in law that those who are relocated from the UK to Rwanda will be protected against removal from Rwanda. And it will make clear that we will bring back anyone if ordered to do so by a court. We will finalise the treaty in light of today's judgment and ratify it without delay. But we need to end the merry-go-round. I said I was going to fundamentally change our country, and I meant it. So I'm also announcing today that we will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked. But of course, we must be honest about the fact that even once Parliament has changed the law here at home, we could still face challenges from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. I told Parliament earlier today that I'm prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships to remove the obstacles in our way. So let me tell everybody now, I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights. If the Strasbourg court chooses to intervene against the expressed wishes of Parliament, I am prepared to do what is necessary to get flights off. I will not take the easy way out, because I fundamentally do not believe that anyone thinks the founding aims of the European Convention on Human Rights was to stop a sovereign parliament removing illegal migrants to a country deemed to be safe in parliamentary statute and binding international law. And I do not believe that we are alone in that interpretation. Across Europe, other governments are following our lead. Italy, Germany, Austria are all exploring models like ours. Indeed, the UNHCR operates its own refugee scheme in Rwanda. And unlike the UK, they don't have a treaty for any of this. We are a reasonable government, and this is a reasonable country. But the British people's patience can only be stretched so thin, and they expect the boats to be stopped. That is why I made it one of my 5 priorities. And whatever our critics might say, we are making progress. Because the Rwanda scheme is only one part of our strategy. Last December, the number entering the UK illegally...
I just don't know, like, how he thinks he can talk about the democracy and rule of law in the same sentence of, well, yeah, the Supreme Court has said that, and they're given lots of examples, even from the United Nations, and the examples how Israel have fared with the system. And so that they're given all these examples, and, well, what we're going to do is we're just going to ignore it, and we're going to and we're just going to make it and say it's fine ourselves. We will determine that it's fine, even though evidence has said that it's not a safe place to go. We will all vote it. And of course, obviously, the Conservative Party have this idea of this whip thing where you can tell your MPs, your Conservative Party MPs, how to vote, otherwise they lose their MP, get sacked. Like recently we saw with this SNP ceasefire vote where Labour, Jess Phillips and a few others went against Keir Starmer, who doesn't want the ceasefire, and voted for the SNP ceasefire and then resigned, or they would have got sacked if they'd done it without, they wanted to do it the honourable way. So therefore, it's going to be very easy for him to say that Rwanda is a safe country without any evidence. He'll just say it because we all agree that it is. How is that democracy? How is that honourable? Or is that really what the British people want? Isn't that the kind of thing that we normally moan about Russia and China doing?
So I was listening to that. And Sam, what did you make of it? He seems to think these flights will be up and running by the spring.
He hopes, he's working very hard on it. He couldn't promise that, though, Mark. Look, a big gamble there from the Prime Minister. A two-part plan. The first is to put the plan to take people to Rwanda into a treaty. Now, it's quite complicated why he'd want to do that. We've got to get to the bottom of what the difference is between having the plan in law and the plan in a treaty. But what it does mean, Rishi Sunak says, is that once migrants are taken to Rwanda, they can stay there. And that's the difference with the situation at the moment. It'll be internationally ratified. It'll be recognised as a treaty, presumably at the UN, and he hopes that will in some way safeguard against challenges. And then the second bit, I think, is the controversial bit. It's the bit that we didn't know that he was going to do. He said it will, he called it an extraordinary step in order to introduce emergency legislation. Now, this legislation will confirm that Rwanda is safe, and he says it means that people cannot further delay flights by bringing the systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked. I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights, he went on to say. Now, it's quite important to try and unpick what we think that does and potentially what it doesn't mean, because I'll be completely clear up front with you, Mark. It's a little bit unclear, and the journalists who were called didn't really dig down into this really important bit of the press conference in order to give us a format. It sounds as if the Prime Minister is going to pass a law that essentially says if the Rwanda plan in future falls foul of the European Convention of Human Rights, as it did in part, according to the Supreme Court today, then that will be disapplied, and we expect that we can, and that this legislation will allow us to ignore that adverse judgment. So it's quite clear that he wants potentially just the European Convention of Human Rights, or potentially other international treaties to effectively no longer apply when it comes to the Rwanda policy. That seems to be what he is saying. The complication, the sort of gap, is quite what happens if the Supreme Court, if domestic courts actually rule that it's illegal again. It's not 100% clear what happens in those circumstances. We know that the Prime Minister is nervous of taking on fully the European Convention of Human Rights and pulling Britain out, because there'll be big consequences on the world stage, not least for the new partnership that he struck with the EU. But right now, let me tell you about the politics of this. Right now, the first word I've had from the right of the party, from those MPs who are particularly concerned about where we were, is to say this will actually quell the mood. That's what I'm told by one vocal supporter of pulling out of the European Convention of Human Rights. They think at this point in time that the Prime Minister has done enough to stop a rebellion, notwithstanding everybody seeing exactly the fine detail of what he proposed and digging into the legal meaning of it. But they think that Rishi Sunak has at time of speaking, done enough for the right of the party to be happy that if international laws, international courts get involved, then that won't actually be a problem with this Rwanda policy. But on the other side, this causes other problems, potentially with other wings of the Conservative Party. It was but a couple of hours ago that we heard the new Home Secretary, James Cleverly, say, look, I don't think we should pull out the European Convention of Human Rights. And you can see a path where the Court of Human Rights challenges the Rwanda policy, finds that Britain falls foul of the convention, finds us in breach of it. We ignore their ruling, and then suddenly we are cast out of the convention, the court, and found to have breached the obligations, and we just ignore that, and that would take us towards the exit path from that convention. So it's not quite clear where ultimately this new direction will take us, and how MPs on perhaps the One Nation wing of the Conservative Party might take it. What will happen then? It could also cause some turmoil, depending on the fine detail, with international allies, with the EU, the Windsor Framework, which regularised our relations with in relation to Northern Ireland with the European Union, which has sort of improved Britain's standing on the global stage. To be honest, that could take a knock from what Rishi Sunak appears to have just promised, because anything that takes us on a path out of those conventions potentially puts us in breach, or certainly anger the European Union, in so much as that matters either to Rishi Sunak or a domestic audience. So there's a lot of politics that flows from that. Just one big picture thought, Mark, though. On Monday, Rishi Sunak seemed to be pitching to the country that he had David Cameron back in his tent, and almost like the sort of the firebrands like Suella Braverman were out, and bluntly, the One Nation sensibles like David Cameron were back in. Today, Rishi Sunak seems to be putting himself on a collision course with international institutions in order to secure this controversial policy, which is backed by a minority of the public, in order to quell anger amongst his backbenchers, amongst the right of his party. The Rishi Sunak of today is very different from the in tone and feel from the Rishi Sunak of what he was trying to signal 2 days ago. This might be very, very smart politics. It might be really, really mixed messages that leave voters confused. That's the kind of thing we're just going to have to find out in time. There is already flooding into my phone lots of mildly confused briefing and counter-briefing about what exactly this plan means. There are allies of Suella Braverman who are already questioning whether the plan that the Prime Minister's announced is as good as it sounds. One ally of Suella Braverman said, this is a treaty which he's putting into legislation. It's just another version of Plan A. He'll be stuck in the courts again. More magic tricks from Rishi's magical thinking. That would appear, in my reading, to suggest the Prime Minister is wrong to suggest that domestic courts can't get involved again. But as I say, this is going to be in legal argument and in the detail, and we've got to work it through. And perhaps the questions at the press conference didn't get to the nub of what he was actually proposing. We'll hope to dig down on that. Some people suggesting right now it does not represent him effectively passing a law to disapply the European Convention of Human Rights. That's what he made it sound like. There's a lot of argument to be had. Let's see how it unrolls.
Right, Sam, let me just put this to you finally. You were talking there in some detail about the politics of all this. Politically, though, did he have another option? What was the other option? Just to walk away from his kind of flagship policy?
So you're right, Mark. There were not many great options for him right now. He could talk about trying to solve the problems that the Supreme Court raised, although that's very hard. It would mean interfering effectively in Rwandan domestic politics, because the list of complaints for the judges was long about the way they run their judicial system and their migration system. He could talk about finding other countries. He could talk about having other deterrence plans, as yet unspecified. I think politically, doubling down feels like the only option he felt like he could go for. Of course, there are other options. Labour doesn't approve of the Rwandan plan, would cancel the Rwandan plan. They claim they don't think it's necessary in order to achieve the migration goals that they believe voters want to see. So it's not the only option, but I think the politics of now, particularly the Conservative politics of now...
So that's the problem with a lot of these things. Even when people say, this is wrong, this doesn't make sense, people just ignore it. because they want to just... I don't know, it's just, isn't it so silly? Isn't it so silly, the world we live in? Alright, I think this one's back to Gaza now.
Connor Gillis, Sky News, Glasgow.
Well, to the Middle East now, and the White House claimed tonight that it had intelligence which showed that Hamas was using one of Gaza's main hospitals to run military operations and store weapons. Tonight, Hamas condemned the claim and said it would give the Israelis a green light to commit what they called further brutal massacres. They called on the UN to investigate. Well, fighting between Israeli soldiers and Hamas militants continued today in the north of the Gaza Strip. The UN says all but one of the hospitals in the area are now completely out of action. The Al-Ahli hospital, reportedly the only facility still taking patients. The Gaza Health Ministry, run by Hamas, said that more than 2,300 people are still trapped inside the Al-Shifa hospital, the largest in the Strip, and that 170 people were buried there today in a mass grave. Well, the Palestinian Red Crescent says attempts to evacuate patients from the Al-Quds hospital have failed, where 300 remain without food, water or fuel. The UN says since the 5th of November, 200,000 people have moved through a corridor south opened by the Israeli military, with many of those injured heading to the Al-Aqsa hospital in central Gaza. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, sent this report from Tel Aviv, and a warning, his report does contain images of injured children.
The first rains have come to Gaza, some light relief, if only for the children. But in the same area, another Israeli airstrike sent yet more injured to one of the few functioning hospitals in central Gaza, where doctors say they are struggling to cope.
The situation gets worse by the day. We get more and more cases because the displaced people are moving. The health service needs to expand at this hospital.
Our team in Gaza filmed some of those displaced who've been ordered to evacuate by the Israeli military.
The Israelis were shouting on loudspeakers. We didn't know where they were. They were shouting, "Evacuate the Al-Ahli hospital." They bombed from the air and the ground. Bullets were flying around.
The corpses have piled up outside Gaza's biggest hospital because so many have died and there isn't the power to refrigerate them, say Palestinians, who are preparing a mass grave. Israelis say they're easing the medical crisis with steps like sending in incubators to Gaza's hospitals, as well as fuel. The World Health Organization says that is a token effort. Only a lengthy pause in fighting will do.
What it needs is the humanitarian break, not just a small few hours of pause, sustained break, resupplying of this hospital, getting power running to the hospitals, either by power grid or by generators.
Israelis are releasing more footage they say justifies their devastating operation in Gaza, including pictures of arms stores, of weapons and rockets. They say they've ordered the emptying of hospitals because they're being used for military purposes by Hamas. This hospital, they say, was used to keep hostages in its basement, but there wasn't much evidence of that, though there were some weapons found there. Israel's confirmed the death of one Israeli soldier taken hostage on October the 7th, killed, says Hamas, in an Israeli airstrike. Relatives and friends of other hostages marched in their hundreds in Tel Aviv, heading for the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem.
5 weeks into this war, Benjamin Netanyahu is under increasing pressure from friends and allies diplomatically and the international community, but also from his own people.
It's been 39 days since we last had any connection with our loved ones, and I don't know if you ever had lost connection for so long with someone you love, but it drives you insane.
Is the world doing enough to release our families? My government should do more, but definitely for sure, the world should do more.
Their fear is the world forgets their lost relatives and friends and moves on, distracted by the massive loss of life in Gaza, in an Israeli operation that has so far failed to find any of them. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Tel Aviv.
Well, a family that was trapped in Gaza for weeks has finally been able to return home to Liverpool. Speaking to Sky News, they said there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas and Israel both share blame for what is happening in their homeland. Sky's North of England correspondent Inzamam Rashid has this report.
For over 3 weeks, morning and night, this was reality for one British family. An endless barrage of bombs around their home in Gaza. Packed inside were 27 people, unsure if they were next to be hit. Now out of danger and back in Liverpool, Aladdin and Olfat want to share their story. With their daughter, they were in Gaza City on holiday when Israel's retaliation began following Hamas's massacre on the 7th of October.
At the beginning, we felt very scared. We didn't know what the reaction will be from the Israeli side. Suddenly, everything started bombing, towering, falling down, very close to us, and we didn't know what we have to do, where we have to go.
They listened to the orders of the Israelis and fled south, taking Aladdin's 97-year-old mother with them. And en route to Khan Yunis, they witnessed endless destruction.
I've seen the war on 2008. I've seen the war 2012. I left the country in 2014, the war on 2014, and I had the worst war in my life ever. I've never heard or seen something like this.
But even in a city where they were told they'd be safe, the rockets continued.
There is no at all any safe place in Gaza Strip from north to south. They're just using the air, the sea, and the land in the same time, bombing in everywhere.
All that Olfert could think of were her other 3 children at home in Liverpool.
I was just telling my daughters here and my son, take care of yourself, take care of each other. If we don't come back, just try to be together. I say to Allah, please protect my kids while they are here by themselves.
Worried and helpless, but now there's just anger.
I do blame Hamas for everything. I do blame also Israel for what they have done to us. No one likes Hamas. No one wants Hamas. I don't want Israel on my land, but I don't want to get rid of my people because of that.
It took 6 risky attempts to leave Gaza via the Rafah border with Egypt until Aladdin and his family managed to cross. Now at home, they can only watch, hope, and pray that this conflict they've lived through comes to an end. Inzamam Rashid, Sky News, Liverpool.
Now back to Rwanda.
Hello there, good evening. The government was dealt a blow by the Supreme Court today. It lost its bid to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, the court's ruling that the country is not deemed safe enough. While speaking to the Rwandan president today, the Prime Minister said he is committed to making the partnership work. And tonight he announced a new international treaty and emergency legislation, which he says will make Rwanda safe for migrants and mean flights of asylum seekers can take off. Well, sending people to Rwanda and stopping the boats was one of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, but the policy has faced a number of hurdles after first being proposed by Boris Johnson in April last year. Sky's political editor Beth Rigby has this report.
Refugee rights are human rights.
This a landmark moment at Britain's highest court for those who would make Britain their home.
Rwanda is unsafe. Rwanda is unsafe.
And a government that's made immigration the cornerstone of its mandate. The Supreme Court ruling then a body blow for Rishi Sunak. Judges unanimous. The Rwanda deportation plan unlawful.
The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
The size of the media scrum reflecting the magnitude of the moment for both sides. The government had been managing expectations, but with the stakes so high, the victor's relief palpable. Were you always confident that you were going to win this case?
No.
You weren't? Why not?
We were always confident that we had a very strong case and we put it to the courts properly, but you can never be confident in a case like this.
And the government now has a huge problem. Their flagship immigration policy grounded, questions now over where to go next. There is a big movement within the Conservative Party that the solution to this is to withdraw from the ECHR. What's your view of that?
It would be a damning indictment on this country were we to join Russia, Belarus in withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights.
Has your plan failed, Prime Minister?
The judgment delivered, the Prime Minister to Parliament to face the music.
He promised that he would stop the boats this year.
Yeah.
This year. Today is the 15th of November. He's wasted all of his time on a gimmick, and now he's absolutely nowhere.
The new Home Secretary cleared the government will push on with the Rwanda plan, but there was pushback too, James cleverly suggesting the government will now rewrite legislation to try again.
The Prime Minister has said that if our domestic legal framework frustrates our plans, he is prepared to change our laws. But I will inform the House we are not going to put forward proposals simply to manufacture an unnecessary row for political gains.
But for some on the Conservative benches, that row no laughing matter. And for the PM, another headache. MPs warning he has to get this policy working or face the consequences. It's the next Tory civil war, isn't it, Simon?
Well, I hope not, because I believe that the Prime Minister will respond with appropriate firmness. Certainly, it is a vital question of his leadership that he does.
OK, but if he doesn't, then it is a civil war, because you guys will go to war with him over it.
I hope we don't need to, Beth.
A PM warned, and by the afternoon he was ready to present the details of his new plan.
We will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation. This will enable Parliament to confirm that with our new treaty, Rwanda is safe. It will ensure that people cannot further delay flights by bringing systemic challenges in our domestic courts and stop our policy being repeatedly blocked.
His day in court, and the Prime Minister really needed a win. Instead, the linchpin of his immigration policy now not just loose, but lost. The Prime Minister insists that he will pass new laws through Parliament and flights will get off the ground next spring. But even as he said it, allies of Suella Braverman told me that this was more magical thinking. A Prime Minister doubling down, only to rinse and repeat. Another torrid day for Rishi Sunak's government, straight off the back of a divisive reshuffle. And this latest attempt to keep a key promise to voters, for now, raising far more questions than it answers. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Just seems that we're in a very worrying place in the UK. When I talked about us becoming very closer to authoritarian governments like Russia and China by, okay, so if the courts frustrate you because, you're wrong, then all we have to do is pass a law, which apparently is what the governments used to do 20 years ago before these things went to the Supreme Court. They just passed the laws themselves. They didn't need to have it judged. I just pass a law and say, yeah, Rwanda's fine. Even though all evidence points, that it isn't, and that's why the Supreme Court said that. They don't just make things up, do they? You can't say you believe in law and democracy and then you're not going to take their judgment. So you're just going to get around that by passing the law yourself, saying it's safe yourself, and then no court can bring it up because you've said it's safe. I mean, how is that democratic? Is that what the people want? And then there's all these other things, like the rise of the Suella Bravermans, the Priti Patels, that kind of, attacks on homeless people. Then there's the universal credit that they're wanting to crack down on people. There's all this stuff seems very on the far right side of politics. And that seems a very dangerous road that we're going down.
The only hope is if Labour is not so far to the right that, although they are not close to the left, I don't know where we're going to go. Seems for the actual people of this country, the little people, they're going to suffer no matter what because of all these policies, as we are already in the cost of living crisis because of poor decisions they made.
So,
I don't know if there's a bit more. I think that was all on this one. Okay, here's the next one. I think we're back to the wall now.
Israeli forces, IDF, have been operating in and around Gaza's biggest hospital. We'll be speaking to a representative coming up shortly. Before that, though, let's bring in Professor Nick Maynard, consultant at Oxford University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. Hi, we've spoken previously. It's nice to see you again. What have you heard from anybody, really, at Shifa Hospital?
Good morning, Kay, and thanks for asking me on again. I've not been able to speak to any of my contacts in Shifa for over 24 hours now. I've spoken to several friends and colleagues in Gaza outside Shifa, including one consultant surgeon who was there until 2 days ago and then was forced to evacuate by the Israeli ground forces. But there's been no communication with any of our contacts within Shifa for the last 36 hours, which of course is very worrying. But the reports I had from my colleagues outside Shifa, who have had some contact, are very frightening indeed. There are patients left in Shifa, but there's no electricity. To give one example, there are 60 patients in Shifa Hospital who are in the renal department having regular dialysis, and you need to have dialysis every 2 or 3 days in order to keep alive, and they've not had any dialysis now for 5 days. So those patients will be slowly dying of their kidney failure. There are patients left on the intensive care unit who are dependent upon mechanical ventilators who cannot be ventilators. And of course, we've seen the many pictures of the newborn babies for whom there are no incubators. So the reports I'm getting are of a devastating scenario where people are rapidly dying.
We've agreed previously that you will not wander into the area of politics when it comes to the situation in Gaza. But I wondered if you had a view on patient safety, given that soldiers are now in the hospital.
I think they're not safe at all. I mean, I don't know what's happening in the last 24 hours or so, but I do know that patients and the residual medical and nursing staff are not allowed to leave. I do know that no other patients are allowed in. So I fear greatly for their safety. And certainly the contacts I have been speaking to assume, with some justification, I think, that they will all die.
The Israeli Defense Force telling us that they are there because they need to take incubators and food and the like, and that is certainly necessary. From when you were previously speaking to your colleagues, they were short of everything, weren't they?
They most certainly were, Kay. The close contact I have, who's a young Gazan doctor who has been speaking to people in Shifa, say that although some aid seems to have been delivered outside the hospital, it is not. The report I'm getting is that it's not being released for use by the doctors and patients in the hospital, and certainly, to my knowledge, none of that aid has got to where it is actually needed.
Okay. Doctor, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to join us again this morning. If you do hear from the Shifa Hospital and you would like to share any of that conversation, then do please feel free to get in touch again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Quick look at the weather for you.
I think there's another bit on of this one.
It seems, what a terrible situation, what a terrible world we live in. That we could live in this world where, I mean, yeah, it's not just Israel going in there with their troops. If Hamas are in there, that's caused this. And obviously the massacre on October 7th started all this, and obviously there's the historical aspects between the two of them as well. But at the end of the day, who is it who's suffering? Human beings are suffering because of this, our system of having war and weapons, which is a man-made construct and nothing that we need. Babies are not born with weapons. God never gave us weapons. You know, there's no need for weapons. Weapons is a man thing, man-made construct to, well, it give us a greater ability to kill things. This is the system. This is part of the system because it's sanctioned by the system because we all have armies and soldiers. That's the system what we're voting for, and this is what happens when you have that. Now babies and people with kidney and cancer whose one existence is going because, you know, the hospital was a war zone. The siege, obviously, of the electricity, water and all that stuff didn't help as well, medicines. But, you know, there's fault, I guess, on both sides. But the actual babies that will not get their lives now, who's there to save them? As we're all brothers and sisters and all human beings. What a damning failure of humanity we all are.
Thanks very much indeed, Milena. Thank you. Looking at other news for you now, latest in the Middle East, the Israeli Defense Forces searching Gaza's biggest hospital for evidence of a Hamas command center that it says was operating from tunnels beneath the complex. Mark has more for us. Mark, I believe you went into Gaza yesterday.
Yes, we weren't taken to the Shifa hospital itself, which is clearly still a key focus. The Israeli Defense Forces have released some footage of their spokesman, Colonel Jonathan Conricus, walking around a room in the basement of the hospital. He discovers he shows us a few AK-47 rifles, some flak jackets. It doesn't resemble a command and control centre. They haven't proved that is what is underneath Shifa yet. They may do. We will see. We, though, were taken to an area about 2 miles to the southeast of Al-Shifa Hospital, and this is what we saw. Deep inside Gaza, 2 miles from the heart of the fighting, there they were. Several hundred Palestinians, young and elderly, ID cards in hand, in a thin line facing south. The voice is an Israeli soldier. In Arabic, they're told that they will be safe if they comply. And beyond, what's left of their homes.
It's just rubble.
We're just to the southeast of Gaza City, next to Salah al-Din Street, and the Israeli military has brought us here to show us a glimpse of what they say are their attempts to protect people. Well, this is the first time we've seen with our own eyes some of the civilians who are trying to leave. This is what the Israelis say is a humanitarian corridor that they've set up. They've paused fighting in this area to allow all the people that you can see here to move south. On the face of it, this is good news, but to see it in just those terms misses the point, because in their minds, this is forced displacement from homes that are now gone. 11,000 people dead, killed in 4 weeks.
Yeah, well, those are big numbers, but when we judge, then it's not about the numbers, it's about eliminating evil, and we saw what Hamas could do, what Hamas intends to do.
And to those who say that in eliminating evil, you are reaping misery on 2 million people, what do you say?
They're welcome to take that question straight back to Hamas. You can see here with your own eyes how much efforts we're putting in to let innocent civilians out.
Well, I have to say it is deeply frustrating. You can see them just there. The Israeli military won't let us any closer. We can't talk to them. Their assessment is that there could be Hamas fighters among them, and it's just not safe to. We moved quickly. They wanted to show us part of Gaza's tunnel system. The soldiers say that Hamas fighters continue to emerge from the network below ground. This is the road Hamas militants drove down for their massacre on October the 7th. and it is the road that they took to bring their hostages back. A few miles away, what's left of a village, and it's clear that it's far from secure. Behind a house, a hole. They lowered explosives down the hole, and then, from a distance, this was a glimpse of just what they wanted us to see. But even from this, it's hard to see what victory looks like. The cost, though, well, that's clear. So as you saw there, that was under the restrictions of the Israeli Defense Forces. They didn't change any of what we said. They didn't look at my script. But what they did do was tell us what we could and couldn't film. So we couldn't film screens. We couldn't film landscape. And we couldn't speak to the Palestinians. And as I say, that was deeply frustrating. Let me give you a shot of the skyline behind us from another camera angle that we've got here. At our point in Sderot. There have been quite a few explosions again this morning. You can see the plumes of smoke there, and as we pound the camera around, you can see some of those homes, destroyed homes that the people who we saw but couldn't speak to have left as they move south. They've moved south to an area which is not safe either, because as we have seen day after day, Khan Yunis, that city in the south where they're told to go for safety, that too is targeted by Israeli airstrikes.
John Healy, Shadow Defence Minister, is with us now. Are we doing enough to support those that need us most in the Middle East at the moment?
We're doing what we can. We're doing what we can to back Israel's right to defend itself under the Geneva Conventions, but saying this is not a blank check. They must do more to meet their duties under international law. And we're doing what we can, and I'd like to see the government...
They're already not following international law. There have been many examples over the last 6 weeks of failures of international law from Hamas and Israel. And I didn't have it, but I saw after this interview came up on their breaking news that 5 countries have brought a claim towards the IPCC to investigate war crimes. But it's just like... It's pathetic, this, from both Labour and Conservatives. They're impotent. They've got no world standing, really, have they? It's only America that does. And it's only if we agree with them that makes it look like we have some kind of standing, but we don't really, because if we were against this, we wouldn't be able to do anything. No one's going to listen to us. And because, this is just suited people speaking. It's face value stuff. It means nothing. Because it does nothing. It's just words. As usual. It's not going to save those children's lives, their one existence, is it?
To try and extend the small humanitarian pauses, because in the end, that's the best way immediately now to try and get more aid into Gaza, the hostages out, and build the confidence that could see further diplomacy.
How much of a blow was it for your boss yesterday that a third of your MPs voted basically against him and in favour of the SNP?
Well, I understand the backbenchers wanting to reflect the calls from their constituents. For the small number of frontbenchers that resigned, I'm sorry to lose each and every one of them, but each and every one of them grappled with this decision. Each and every one of them wants to see Keir Starmer in Downing Street, and will work hard together with everyone else to win that next election.
Not very good at rallying the troops, though, is he? If a third of them decided to vote with the SNP.
Well, we're not a protest party, and we're doing and saying what we would do in government. And when it comes to a parliamentary vote, Keir Starmer's right to be firm. He's right to require from his front bench the collective discipline and responsibility. And he was not going to change his principal position, if you like, just for the sake of internal party management. We've seen that too often with Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives.
Yeah, collective discipline and responsibility. How did that go for him?
Well, it's firm. He's made the arguments.
A third of the party, but a third of the MPs voted against him.
So some backbenchers wanted to reflect their constituents. The small number of frontbenchers made their decision to resign. Difficult decision. This is an extremely difficult for everyone. Everybody wants to see an end to the fighting. Everybody wants to see a relief of the humanitarian suffering in Gaza. The question is, what's the best way to do that? And that's why we've been arguing and doing what we can, both in public calls and private diplomacy, to back the work to get small pauses extended to get the aid in and hostages out, and why a call for a ceasefire now is a demand on Israel to give up its right to defend itself against Hamas when they've still got the fighters, the missile systems, the command centres in place to strike again. So that's why we've been, as a Labour Party, doing what we can in opposition to help that cause for breaks in the fighting. And we've been doing that alongside the European Union. We're doing it alongside the US.
Sure.
And reflecting also what the UN's aid chief, Martin Griffiths, is also regards as the most viable, practical way of helping now.
Back to the House of Commons. It was a difficult vote. There'll be other difficult votes, especially if you're in government. He can't have a third of his party not voting with him.
Right, that's waffle.
No, and this is a...
That's enough of that one. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, even if they had won a vote where
it's sparkle.
The SNP got people to vote for a ceasefire. Israel's not going to listen to the UK anyway, so just would have showed our morality.
Now, events in the Middle East have resulted in the Labour leader facing a rebellion over his stance on the Israel-Hamas war. A number of shadow frontbenchers have quit after defying Sir Keir Starmer by voting in the Commons for a ceasefire. While Stella Creasy was one of the party's MPs who went against the leader and voted exactly for that, and she joins us now live from North London. Stella Creasy, why did you defy Keir Starmer over this?
I don't think there is a big degree of difference because everybody wants to stop the bloodshed. The difference in approaches is just about how best to prioritise government time. A ceasefire is not a ceasefire if it's one-sided. It has to involve all actors. Otherwise, you are giving a green light for the violence to continue on one side. And a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire both require negotiation. They both require involving people who can put pressure on those people to stop the violence in order for aid to be delivered. To my mind, I think we have to be realistic. No vote in the House of Commons is going to change what is happening in Tel Aviv or Doha in the negotiations that are happening. But it is about directing government time and what we want to see our government representatives raising, supporting and encouraging. And so I supported both motions last night because I don't think a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire are mutually exclusive. And I think all of us want to see the negotiations which are taking place for either a ceasefire or a humanitarian pause to succeed, because anything would be better than the horrific bloodshed and distress that we are seeing now.
Fun, yeah. You know, as you say, a ceasefire or a humanitarian pause are not mutually exclusive. What is the point of increasing divisions within the Labour Party over this?
That's my point. I don't actually think there is division. I think there is a difference of opinion about what you can do at this point.
What the whips are asking.
Nobody I know in the Labour movement wants to see the bloodshed continue. Keir Starmer has been absolutely crystal clear about his concern about the Palestinian people and the scenes that we are seeing in Gaza. As somebody who's had the privilege to work with the hostage families for the last couple of weeks in trying to secure their release, we are all absolutely adamant that their families must be released immediately without any conditions. The issue here has simply been about the different ways forward that government can take at this point. But let's be clear, you know, a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire both require negotiation. They both risk the possibility of Hamas regrouping. We all want to see Hamas dismantled. So there are risks in all approaches. The critical thing is what can be achieved now. And that's what I think moving forward everybody is focused on, because above all, nobody wants to see this situation continue.
For a ceasefire to exist, you would have to get Hamas to agree, and you would have to believe that Hamas would abide by it. Do you really think it's possible to negotiate with a terrorist group like Hamas and receive any assurances from them that would make a ceasefire real?
Those are also conditions you would have to put on a humanitarian pause. I don't have any truck with Hamas. As I say, I've been working with the hostage families. I know that they are a brutal terrorist organisation. I do recognise there are actors in the region who can bring to bear influence on them. And as I say, the vote last night, let's be honest, nobody in Doha or in Qatar, where the headquarters of Hamas would have been watching, But what we could be doing is saying to our government, look, when there are opportunities to press for a ceasefire, for a mutual ceasefire, for the immediate release of hostages, for that aid to get to Gaza, then we want to see you standing with others in the international community and saying that that must be our ambition, because we can see the scale of suffering, because we can see that the siege of Gaza has not led to hostages being released. It's not actually securing the outcomes that anybody wants in this battle, and that we are not going to be able to stand up for international law if we are not equally concerned both about the taking of hostages and about the possibility of collective punishment. I know people want division here. I know people want easy answers. There aren't. There is only hope that the negotiations that are happening right now might be successful, and that's what we want the government to get behind.
Israel doesn't seem to think that a ceasefire is possible. Are you not concerned that pushing for a ceasefire sends a message to Israel that you don't think it has the right to defend itself?
I've been absolutely crystal clear that Israel, of course, has the right to defend itself. I also am very concerned by some of the things that I've heard Israeli representatives say, talking about the mass expulsion of people from Gaza with no return home. I'm horrified by the things I've heard Hamas say. But I also know the reality of the situation is that on the ground, people are negotiating. In fact, Israel is leading those negotiations, looking at how to end the bloodshed, looking at how to keep their people safe. So I think that the question here is, do we continue to look for heat or do we look for light? And light, for me, becomes absolutely crystal clear. We must dismantle Hamas. There can be no terrorist threat. We must work towards that two-state solution, which is a free Palestine and a safe Israel. We must see the unconditional immediate release of the hostages, and we must see aid going in. Now, whether they are achieved through the start of a humanitarian pause, because a humanitarian pause and a ceasefire are not mutually exclusive, one can prefigure the other. Ultimately, the violence has to stop because there will have to be a negotiated solution to the underpinning of this, which is securing that two-state solution. These aren't so very apart positions, and I think it's beholden on us in the UK Parliament to be ruthlessly practical about what we can do. So I am absolutely determined this government must do more for those hostages. It must support more aid. It must stand up for international law, whoever is breaching it. And it must look at what it can do to support the calls, not just for an end to this element of the conflict, but for a long-term resolution, which is a two-state solution.
OK, Stella Creasy, Labour MP for Walthamstow, thank you. This is Sky News Today. Coming up.
Oh, this is always a way, like with the breaches of the law. All they ever care about is the ones they want to care about. It doesn't matter, if it's something they don't want to look at, they're not going to look at it. Because it's their friends, and they don't want to cause any trouble down the line. Laws are picked and chosen, aren't they? But also, this reminds me a bit of Father Ted. Remember, there's an episode where there's a naughty film on, and Father Ted and Father Maguire are standing outside waving flags, down with this type of thing, or whatever. It just reminds me of that. I wish we could get our world leaders, Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, all these world leaders, because this is basically what they're doing. They're saying, oh, we need to stop the violence, but we can't agree on a ceasefire. I want them all to stand by in Gaza and all just stand there and watch while they see this the bombs and the misery and the blood and the children dying and their limbs being torn. And I know you could say it's also for the massacre of October the 7th, but obviously that's past now, and this is still happening, and it's been happening now for 6 weeks, with 11,000 people losing their lives. And yes, some of them may be terrorists, but there's lots of children and innocent people that are being killed. I want them to all stand there and just stand there saying, stop this, whilst, they're just not actually doing anything. They're not stopping, they're just watching. Because that's effectively what they're doing. It's just they're all sat in their bunkers, their offices, and in their suits, enjoying their meals, enjoying their families.
Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Israel's military says that it's recovered the bodies of 2 hostages close to Gaza's biggest hospital. They are 19-year-old IDF Corporal Noah Marciano, who was confirmed dead earlier this week, and 65-year-old Judith Weiss, who was abducted from a kibbutz on October the 7th. Since then, Gaza's health ministry says that more than 11,000 Palestinians have been killed, many of them children. Well, joining me now from Sderot in southern Israel is our correspondent, Mark Stone. So, Mark, get us up to date then with the very latest.
Well, the news about the IDF corporal has only been released within the last couple of hours. The Israeli military says that the body of Noah Marciano was discovered, they say, in a building adjacent to the Shifa hospital. We don't know if it is the same building where yesterday they discovered the body of Judith Weiss. But clearly for those two families, it is the most awful news. That so many families have been waiting for news of their loved ones. 239 hostages still being held by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad inside Gaza. We may get some more news today. It's clear that the Israeli military are closing the net around the Shifa hospital. They have believed for many years that underneath the Shifa hospital, what they say is a command and control center of Hamas. Whether or not that is the case, it is clear, it is becoming clear that hostages that certainly at one point were being held in areas close to that hospital. The hospitals, as I say, are the focus, and because of the military operations around them, for the people inside, for the patients, for the doctors, it is unbearable. And we spent a bit of time yesterday talking to one doctor in one of those hospitals. Gaza's main harbour, now full of Israeli armour. This footage, filmed and released by the Israeli military, is more than a hint that this brutal 5-week-long war is still in its earliest stages. On the ground, street-to-street battles continue, and beyond, the news from Gaza City's hospitals is truly grim. These are the last images we received a week ago from the Al Ali Baptist Hospital, filmed for us by Dr. Hassan Abu Sita, and we managed to get him by phone late on Thursday afternoon.
Today has been absolutely catastrophic. We've shut the operating rooms in Al Ali Hospital, which was the only functioning hospital in Gaza City. There was the bombing and the shelling were so close to the hospital, literally in the areas adjacent to the hospital. We have left the hospital now, and we're now in the central zone.
And you've had to leave the wounded people in the hospital?
We've had to leave the wounded people. There are hundreds of wounded there.
The streets around the nearby Shifa hospital have been a focus for Israel for days now, and overnight they say they discovered the body of a hostage. Yehudit Weiss was found, they say, in a building near the hospital. It's not been revealed where or how she died. She was abducted from Kibbutz Be'eri on the 7th of October. Her husband was killed that day. This is the latest evidence, says Israel, of a tunnel system near Shifa Hospital. It's not possible independently to verify what this is or was, or if it leads to a Hamas command and control center, which Israel and America have repeatedly claimed is beneath the hospital. Those who can escape the northern hospitals mostly end up here, at Al-Aqsa Hospital in central Gaza. It is still functioning. The preparation here is for an amputation. The child, the sole survivor of a family, will now lose her legs. That is, if she makes it. Just a couple of miles away, we were with the Israeli military. We can only get into Gaza with them and only see what they want to show us. The people leaving, the humanitarian corridors, but we were not permitted to speak to people here.
Hamas is actively, to this day, while I'm speaking to you, shooting rockets, even in this humanitarian.
But that doesn't give you the right. That doesn't give you the right. That doesn't give you the right.
Forces in a humanitarian corridor.
But that doesn't give you the right to target civilian buildings.
We, as the IDF, have said from the very beginning, when Hamas launched this entire massacre, and are breaking every international law by what they're doing, we are targeting Hamas terrorists.
By nightfall, Gaza was in complete darkness. The electricity, the phone, the internet, in and out. The hospitals closing one by one. Patients still inside.
Imagine.
Now, we hope to speak to Dr. Abu Sita again today. Of course, he's now not in that hospital. He has moved to central Gaza to a refugee camp there. The conversation was was awful. I mean, he was telling me that he and his team had carried out multiple amputations, but then a point came when they simply couldn't stay in the hospital anymore, and so they had to leave. That's one hospital. The Shifa hospital is a different one. It is the biggest one in Gaza City, and I think we can probably expect more information to come out from the Israeli Defense Forces from there as they continue their operations around that hospital, and perhaps we will get more news on more hostages as well. I should just tell you too that the negotiations to find some sort of way to release the hostages, they're very much ongoing. Prime Minister Netanyahu was on American TV overnight and seemed to suggest that there could well be some movement there. So watch on that. And Anna, one last thing. The focus is here on Gaza, but up in the West Bank, there is an awful lot going on. Another raid by the Israeli military on the Jenin refugee camp. That is in the northern West Bank town of Jenin. It is, so says the Israeli military, a focus of theirs because they believe that Hamas sympathizing militants are operating there. 3 people killed in the West Bank in Jenin overnight.
OK, well, Mark, I know you'll keep it up to date with all the latest developments. Thanks very much indeed, though, for now. Thanks, Mark. Let's take a look now at some of the...
What a terrible situation to be in.
A demographic that would know who Cary Grant is.
Oh no, it's just terrible, isn't it? I suppose it's problematic, isn't it? Because Hamas put well, if it is true that they're underneath, well, Michael Clark, the analyst for Sky, said Israel actually built tunnels under Shifa, so there are definitely tunnels under there, and if they did make a command post and put the hostages on there, would make sense, because that would be a safe place, because they know internationally you can't strike hospitals, so if you wanted to keep hostages safe, that would be the safest place to do it. And I guess also the safest place to have a command centre, but of course that then makes the hospital a target. And is that the reason why Israel cut off, did the siege, didn't give it power and water and electricity and all that stuff? Or was it because it doesn't care about what happens to the Palestinians, because these two have been hating each other for such a long time that they've lost their humanity with each other? So it's difficult to tell which is the case. But I guess at the end of the day, thousands of innocent people have died because of these two fighting. And who's meant to be looking after the hospital? Who's meant to be taking care of these patients if the doctors have to leave? And the children, they're bringing incubators now, but a lot of people say that they haven't thought this out properly. And there should have been these people taken out before these things happened. I don't know, it's just so... I can't imagine what it'd be like to be living there, or have your relative in there, or your child in there. You just, you've been trying to have a baby, you have a baby in a war zone, and that baby needs an incubator, and there's not enough of them, or there's no power, and your baby dies unnecessarily. This is the world we all live in, and the system we all believe in, that we vote in all the time. Well, these are products of these things. So unless you change those things, unless you stop us making weapons, stop us dividing land, and actually all understand that intrinsically we're all human beings, we're all the same, we're all brothers and sisters, and we should be working together, not dividing land and working against each other and creating these unnecessary wars and fights and miseries.
Welcome back. We're staying in the Middle East. Israel says the next stage in its mission to eradicate Hamas has now begun. Fighting continues in the north of the Strip, with many continuing to move south. Residents in part of southern Gaza, however, around Khan Yunis, which was meant to be a safe area from the north, have now been told to move. It all comes as tensions in the West Bank continue to rise, with reports of fighting taking place in Jenin. Joining me now is Mark Regev, Senior Advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Israeli Ambassador to the UK. Mark Regev, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to start with Khan Yunis and the IDF dropping leaflets over this area south of Gaza. It is the same area where the IDF ordered Gazans in the north to flee last month. We know that 2/3 of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people has been made homeless by the war. Every available space, we're told, in Khan Yunis and the south is being taken up. It's very, very crammed. Are you concerned about where these people who are receiving these leaflets dropping on them now, where they go?
Yes, we've actually said in the leaflets the areas where they should go to, the sort of areas where we know we don't expect there to be heavy fighting. Obviously, Hamas has a presence throughout the Gaza Strip, and we can't give them immunity anywhere, and we will pursue them. And at the same time, in parallel to our campaign against Hamas, we will do our utmost to safeguard the civilian population. And in those leaflets and in the other messages, we've been specific for where they should go, the sort of areas we know that will be out of the fighting.
Where are those areas?
So they are to the west of Khan Yunis. They are specified in the documents, the humanitarian areas. They will be safer there. But you have to know that just as Hamas had an infrastructure under the city of Gaza, a very formidable military structure, Khan Yunis has also, unfortunately, become a place where Hamas has been in government for 16 years, where they control and they have a military network that has to be taken on. So we're asking civilians, please get out of harm's way. We don't want to see you caught up in the crossfire between the Israeli Defense Forces and the Hamas terrorists.
What would you say to those Gazans receiving these leaflets and seeing what happened to their northern counterparts, the Gazans who were in the north, who fled to the south and then found themselves bombed whilst they were on the roads fleeing south? How can they know? I mean, you've just said, in fact, that you can't give them immunity anywhere. So
I said we can't give Hamas immunity anywhere. Of course, we don't. We're not talking about the civilian population. That's not related.
But it seems that you can't guarantee the civilian population safety anywhere either, because if they go to the west, they could find themselves underneath the same airstrikes that killed people who were on the road south fleeing.
So my understanding is the people who shot people who were fleeing was actually Hamas. I know that, of course, they blamed it on the IDF, but no, it was not us. We do not attack civilians, especially civilians who were fleeing to the south. Our whole goal was to have civilians flee to the south to get out of the fighting around Gaza City.
Okay, we certainly at Sky, we can't verify that. We're not able to get in, of course, unless we're on an embed with the Israeli Defense Forces. So we certainly can't verify that. And the Palestinian reporters we've obviously heard from have been saying the exact opposite. So
no, but can I just take up that point? Palestinian journalists working in Gaza may be honorable people, yes, but they are working in the framework of a very violent, authoritarian and repressive Hamas regime. And the idea that they can report anything that does not conform with the Hamas party line is, of course, an illusion. You know this. You've reported in countries which have been non-democratic. You know the limitations. That applies equally in Hamas's controlled Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. As independent journalists here at Sky News, we would say that I'm afraid we can't verify any of this. Let's move on from that. We can't verify what you're saying. We certainly can't verify that the Palestinian journalists, as you say, honourable people, courageous people who are staying in their country are under the influence of Hamas themselves. I wanted to just look at the wording of these leaflets. As I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they say something along the lines of, for your safety, you need to evacuate your places of residence immediately and head to known shelters. Now, we know from reporters on the ground, and we know from humanitarian agencies on the ground as well, that there are no shelters in Gaza. So, I mean, with that in mind, the wording of this leaflet seems very cynical.
I disagree. I think the people of Gaza who will read those leaflets know exactly what to do. And the same cynicism was expressed when we leafleted the north, and yet the overwhelming majority of the population heeded our advice and did leave areas of combat and did move south, and therefore was saved from being caught up in the crossfire between Israel and Hamas. And I believe you'll see the same thing now. Of course.
Okay, so they moved, let's say they did eventually, a lot of them move, as you say, south. If we had a map up a little bit ago of where they'd moved to. So they moved from the north and from Gaza City down to the south, in fact, to Khan Yunis, which is sort of shown in red, and to places like Rafah. Now those places are becoming unsafe. But of course, the Gazans aren't able to move north anymore. So this whole population of this strip, I don't really understand how the IDF feels that it can fit into this very tiny western area of Khan Yunis. So I'm imagining, I'm really sorry, because I don't know if you can see this map on the screen yourself, but sort of to the west of the road
Correct.
that runs all the way down. How on earth can the whole population fit in there, and where else can they go if they can't?
Well, first of all, we want to see them move exactly as you've said to the west there along the coast, because then, number one, they'll be close to the Rafah crossing, and so they can get the supplies that they need. As you know, the trucks are coming in daily, and we're increasing the number. The international community's got an effort there, bringing in water, food, and medicine. And at the same time, the French have talked about bringing a hospital ship, and there can be others who'll do the same, and the establishment of field hospitals. So the idea is to create a humanitarian safe zone there, closer to the coast.
Just to stop him on there. Are they trying to push them like cattle all the way to the Rafah-Egypt border so they can displace them, which goes against international law, apparently what was done years ago? And also, the international community shouldn't be the ones providing the aid. The opposing country, who's a democratic country, who's doing this war, they should be doing the aid, but they gave a siege instead of giving aid. And just because it's lucky that America and the West liked Israel because they're helping them out by giving this aid, which should be being done by Israel, surely.
Is it a perfect solution? It's not a perfect solution, because we're in a war, and a dreadful war that Israel didn't want, of course. But at the same time, it's about managing risk, and people will be safer, without doubt, if they heed the advice of the Israeli military and move out of a combat zone. You saw what happened to the city of Gaza. Khan Yunis is a center for Hamas activity as well. We're asking civilians, please vacate the area for your own safety. We don't want to see you caught up in the crossfire.
Okay, so let's assume they do start moving. So that is even more people, more than two-thirds already displaced, even more people displaced. The humanitarian situation that you mentioned there at Rafah is dire. It's beyond dire. From every single humanitarian agency we have heard about, it is, I don't think there are really words to describe what's going on. 500 trucks came in, aid trucks used to come in normal times to Gaza. I mean, nowhere near that amount. We're talking sort of tens are coming in at the moment.
No, we're past 100. We're past 100 trucks a day, and we're hopeful to get to 200 trucks.
Sorry, say that again.
I said we're up to over 100 trucks a day, and we're hopeful we can get in the next couple of days even double that.
Okay, so still less than half of what normally came in when people still had
but we are in a
homes.
war situation, and in war things are much more difficult, and the most important thing here is to save life.
But that's the exact opposite. To save life, you need 500 trucks coming in, and you have, less than half of that.
But that's in peacetime. We are in war. And what we're trying to do is save life. Now, if you want to pretend there's no war, of course there's a war.
No, but your statement there doesn't make sense. You're in a war and you're trying to save life, but you're absolutely not trying to save life if you're not allowing life-saving aid to come in.
We are. I just said we're up to 100 trucks a day, and we hope that will double in the next couple of days.
Which doesn't save life.
Yes, it does. If we bring in water, food, medicine, other support for the innocent population, of course, that's saving life.
Fuel?
Fuel, there's a decision taken today to allow fuel to come in, specifically fuel for hospital generators and so forth. But I want to be very, very clear here. If we find evidence that Hamas continues to steal fuel, as they have done in the past, and divert it to their war machine and to their tunnels and to their missiles, so that fuel will be in jeopardy. But as you know, as of this week, fuel is coming in.
Okay, let's talk about northern Gaza, because I think it was the other day you told us here at Sky News that 1 million had left northern Gaza. That left around 200,000 people in your estimate there. That makes you the occupying force in that region. Does that also now give you the obligation to put in a large humanitarian operation in northern Gaza?
We will coordinate with the humanitarian organizations to make sure that the people of northern Gaza...
You see, everything's about with the NGOs, the organizations, the charities. Why are they using charities? Why aren't they doing it? This is the same story we hear everywhere. Suited people don't care about real, actual people.
We will coordinate with the humanitarian organizations to make sure that the people of northern Gaza receive the supplies that they need. Obviously, we have no intention whatsoever to see the civilian population suffer. They've suffered enough in this war. We understand that.
If you didn't want them to suffer, you wouldn't have put them in a siege for 6 weeks, would you?
We understand that.
What have you done so far in terms of that?
I think we're talking about, we're just now, the military operations are still ongoing in the north. It's not like it's over. I wish it was already, but you can't talk about a Marshall Plan before you first do D-Day, correct? We've got to make sure we have security in the area, and then, of course, we can do a major effort. I do understand, though, that Israel has been talking to the UN and other humanitarian organizations to already start bringing support to the north.
Okay. Your boss, Netanyahu, said earlier that we're trying to minimize civilian casualties, but, and I quote here, unfortunately, we're not successful. I wonder what you made of the tone in which he said it. Are we to believe that Israel, one of the most powerful militaries in the world, with some of what it says is the best intelligence in the world, bolstered by more than $3.8 billion a year of military aid from the US, are we to believe that that military cannot take out Hamas without killing well over 11,000 civilians in a country of 2.3 million, in a country that is smaller than, forgive the British reference, but the Isle of Wight?
Bill, with respect, there's no evidence whatsoever that we've killed 11,000 civilians. That's what Hamas is telling you. To say that first of all, that number is a Hamas number.
Hamas figures.
No, but you've made a double. Sorry, Bill, you've made a mistake. You have made a mistake, Bill. Bill, you've made a mistake. You said 11,000 civilians. There's no evidence.
Humanitarian agencies who operate in the region and who have done for years, for decades, those figures do tend, in the fullness of time, to be correct.
You are incorrect, and let me explain why. Please let me finish my sentence, Bill. 11,000 is the Hamas figure, and they have a propaganda interest to exaggerate. But more serious is you said 11,000 civilians. That means all the casualties in Gaza. We haven't hit a single Hamas terrorist. That's obviously illogical. Obviously illogical. To say 11,000 civilians have been killed is blatantly and obviously incorrect. And you are repeating Hamas propaganda. That is simply not true.
It's 11,200, I believe, they now say. And as I say,
they say civilians. They say, who says 11,000 civilians besides Hamas? Please tell me.
They
don't say civilians. No, they don't say civilians.
It's the Gaza Health Ministry that has given out the number of 11,200 thus far of Palestinians.
Yes, but that's the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza.
Of those, it's more than 4,000 children. And
okay, that's once again, that's Hamas's numbers.
Independent journalists talk to the humanitarian agencies that operate in that region. They confirm that in past conflicts, the numbers given out by the Gaza Health Ministry do in the end tend to be, broadly speaking,
but they don't at all relate to combatants. That means terrorists and civilians. To say 11,000 civilians have been killed is blatantly wrong.
Just very quickly, I want to ask you about the West Bank. There are reports overnight of strikes on hospitals in Jenin's, deaths there as a result of those. Is Hamas thought now to be in the West Bank? Is that why those hospitals are being targeted?
No, unfortunately, you have Hamas cells across the West Bank. You can just ask the Fatah people, they will agree with that assessment. And they are interested in creating a crisis also on the West Bank, in causing the sort of violence that we saw on the Israeli-Gaza border on October 7th. And as a result, we have been preempting. We've been arresting people. We've been taking them out. The idea is to avoid an escalation by nipping this in the bud. That's exactly what we're doing. I'm sure British forces would do the same in a similar situation.
Okay. All right. Mark, Regev, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Let's talk about this a little bit more. Joining me now is the political editor of the Jewish News, Lee Harpin. Very good morning to you. Thanks for talking to us. And pro-Palestinian protest organisers are saying today that they're going to hold a day of action today, slightly different from the marches of previous weeks, but 100 events across the country. Do you think that there will be many Jewish people who'll be troubled to hear that, given the incidents of anti-Semitism seen on the edges of previous protests?
Good morning. I think it goes without saying that many people in the Jewish community are really quite disturbed by what will now be the 6th week of these protests. To many people, rightly or wrongly, the centre of London is becoming a bit of a no-go zone every weekend as a result of these demos. We are seeing, and it is on the margins, but we're seeing, every week hateful, openly anti-Semitic incidents taking place on these demos. And I repeat, that is not, these incidents are not amongst the majority on the demos, but they are happening They're being replayed on social media throughout the week as well, only to sort of adding to the fear in the community. And I'm really quite concerned at the moment that, there's real division within this country, especially sort of interfaith divisions. And we really need to start to work hard at trying to repair the damage that's being caused week in, week out by these demos.
I don't think it's the demos that are causing this problem, isn't it? What the action that's happening in Gaza that is possibly causing it, no?
Of the protests feel that it's too important an issue to not march. They say that there are many Jewish people who join them, and the vast majority are peaceful, as you've acknowledged yourself. Are you happy that the marches do go ahead?
Yes, I'm not somebody who, calls for marches to be banned at all. I believe in the right to protest. It's a sacred right that many people have fought for a long time in this country. So I wouldn't want to see that eroded. But what I am concerned about is there does seem to be a lack of clarity around the laws at the moment. Police seem powerless or unable to act at times where there are clear sort of incidents that maybe don't just cross the threshold of criminal incidents, but I believe that there should be more room, and I think Labour have been talking about this. Yvette Cooper, just tightening up the laws around the threshold, monitoring people who maybe persistently offend, looking at radicalisation, looking at the people that lead these demos, and that's my real worry here, is that there's young people attending these demos for the right reasons, but they're being sucked into radical politics that is potentially very dangerous moving forwards.
The Met's Assistant Commissioner did talk about the events of last weekend when there was that big march in London. I think we've just seen pictures on our screen of it just now, and said that amongst the main marchers, there was nothing like the sort of physical violence that had been carried out by the right wing, as they put it. And he also said, though, that the impact of hate crime and in particular anti-Semitic offences is just as significant. Do you think that the police do acknowledge that there is a real issue here that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, I think the police have very unfairly come under attack, particularly by our former Home Secretary, and the idea of playing the far right off against the pro-Palestinian demonstrators was totally wrong and inappropriate, and there are threats. And I think last week's demo proved that the police and Smart Rowley was completely correct. The far right tried to attack the police early on, and they are still a significant threat. So it's wrong just to point the finger at the pro-Palestinian demonstrators. There's a threat of radicalisation and extremism, and it comes from both wings, and we need to be doing a lot more to tackle that.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned Suella Braverman, obviously now former Home Secretary. She did talk about the marches being hate marches, didn't she? And she also said that the anti-Semitism that was being witnessed in some places was deeply troubling, and she highlighted the fact that some Jewish people felt threatened by marches, but you don't feel that she was an ally, if you like, in what you want to see changed?
I was quite fearful that she was trying to lead my community, the Jewish community, into some kind of culture war in this country, and I think there's been a persistent problem with this government over that. They're very good to talk up their concerns about the Jewish community, rightly, of course, but with rhetoric that is, in fact, very dangerous. I think this was certainly the case with Suella Braverman. I heard, this is not a party political thing, but I heard Lord Howard in the week, and he was deeply critical of Suella Braverman himself. The attacks on the police, to me, are completely wrong. And as Michael Howard pointed out, the police can only police down to the laws of the land. And if the laws aren't there, we need proper laws. We need to change the laws. We need to tighten up the laws. Now, I'm not saying we should infringe, as I said earlier, on people's right to protest, but I do think there's a lack of clarity over the laws. I think there's a term, I think it's non-hate crimes, which are crimes that just go under the threshold, and perhaps it's the chants that we've heard at the demos repeatedly, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I don't think at the moment there is, that's an arrestable offence, but persistently doing that, and the fact that there can probably only be one meaning to that chant, and that is the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world. Does it meet the threshold? I think questions need to be asked around that, and maybe something can be done to toughen things up.
OK, well, Lee Harpin, really interesting to get your views this morning. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of it. There's just a messy situation that's happening in Gaza, and, well, it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Those people in the hospitals that are dying now, I don't know how serious Israel are about taking charge of that hospital, whether they even have the facilities, because, a lot of people can't be moved. And it's dangerous to move patients, and maybe there's not enough fuel anyway. It's too late because of the siege. But at the end there, you had about protest. I think it's Ben Jamal that organises these protests. I think he's a British Palestinian. But maybe what he should do is have a march where it's Israel and Jews together. Muslims and Jews together. Obviously Christians as well, but in the form of pro-Palestine, as in to stop the innocent people getting killed, or ceasefire. I guess they can't say stop the war, because that would maybe say that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself, and obviously they have to get rid of Hamas. Maybe there's a different military operation that could be done, a special operation, as Russia would call it, like a strike force, rather than bombing civilian, the whole of Gaza and making it a Syrian war zone. And then they have the pro-Palestine, and then also free the hostages. The only problem is obviously it would be dangerous, because the problem is with every protest is you always get the idiots. You always get the one that they're not there for the protest. They're there to cause a fight. They're there, are the ones that are probably singing from the river and whatever, or are carrying placards that are anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. My worry about changing laws is, the government would love to get rid of protest. They'd love to be like Russia and China and not have people protesting and causing them all this trouble. But anyway, it doesn't matter anyway, because they never listen to the protests. 1 million people protested about the illegal war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were ignored. People put polls all the time on change gov, or whatever it's called. Thousands of people sign it. They ignore them as well. You write to your MPs and etc. and have questions put up, and they ignore them. So I don't know really why they're worried about the power of the people, because they ignore you. They ignore us all. They do whatever they want, these suited people. But I guess it's important for us to remember we're human beings, and when we see suffering of human beings, whether it's kidnapping or whether it's indiscriminate collective punishment, then we should be protesting for that and getting our governments to do whatever they can do, even if they are inept. Because who wants to be standing at the sidelines on the wrong side? Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.